How many of you are aware that there's an election this week? If you're not aware of that, you must have been living under a rock or totally off the grid, because I think it's the number one thing in the news and everywhere else. I want to read a portion of an article from a magazine called The Christian Ministry. The writer says, "When my father was a youngster, he had 3 bumper stickers on the back of his station wagon. The first one warned, 'I break for yard sales,' and believe me, he did. The other 2 were more curious. The one on the left proclaimed, 'Sub Kisner for sheriff,' while the one on the right announced, 'Calvin Bauer for sheriff.' My dad had a reputation for backing a winner. I asked him why he displayed both stickers. He replied that both were good people, that both were friends whom he had known for years, and he felt great joy in being able to support 2 candidates for the same office. Either would perform his duties with competence and sensitivity, and both of them had asked him to display a bumper sticker. Eventually, he would cast his vote for one or the other, but he felt no need to choose between them prematurely. In any given political conversation, he would defend first one and then the other." It is an interesting commentary on contemporary political values that we can be against all the candidates for any particular office, but not for them. I suspect that many people in our town were unhappy with my father's position. We live in a time when we feel compelled to choose sides, for and against, this or that, either or. This is even more true in religion than in politics. Either we are filled with the Spirit or unredeemed, high church or low church, tolerant or fanatical, zealous or uncommitted. We feel the need to declare ourselves as conservative or liberal, evangelical or mainline, open-minded or true to the fundamentals of the faith. There's an increasing tendency for us to define ourselves over against others, with all the dangers of self-righteousness implicit in so doing. The world itself seems to be dividing into opposite and warring camps. The poor and oppressed against the rich, the upholders of traditional family values against those who some think would destroy society as we know it. Political rhetoric degenerates into name-calling. The bedeviling complexity of many situations is reduced to bumper sticker simplicity." And it goes on, but I'll stop there. I suspect that is something that all of us can agree on, is the fact that our political rhetoric has degenerated into name-calling, and sometimes even worse. And the amazing thing is that article was written 20 years ago, the October 1998 edition of Christian Ministry magazine. And I believe we would agree that it's worse, perhaps far worse now than it was then. The division and the animosity in our nation seems to be at an all-time high, something that many people find to be quite frightening, and something that Christian people should find to be deplorable. Although, unfortunately, Christians seem to be as divided as anyone else around certain social and political issues. Dave Barry, the comedian, wrote here, "Not since the darkest days of the Civil War have so many people unfriended each other on Facebook." Gives us something to think about. Indeed, we live in a disturbing time. The division within our political system has far-reaching effects. It spills over into every aspect of our society, and in many cases even into the church. There are theological issues that divide churches and church members. Fortunately, we here at Mountain View Fellowship have not experienced much of that, but we are all aware that it's out there, and the potential is always there. In my 41 years of ministry, I've never felt that I had to be so conscious of needing to measure everything that I say, especially from the pulpit, fearing that someone will try to attach political implications to it, whether that's intended or not. In fact, I sometimes wonder if I'm even being true to the gospel in being so cautious around issues about which Jesus spoke out very plainly. And yet, in our deeply divided society, what an opportunity we have as Christians and as a church to provide a different way and a different model. In Paul's letter to the Ephesians, he's writing to a church in Ephesus in which there were deep divisions. There were people from many different backgrounds, religious backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, being drawn into this new emphasis on teachings of a man named Jesus. The most notable division in that church was that part of the church was made up of people who were from Jewish background. They were people familiar with the Old Testament. They understood Jesus as coming out of that same background as well. And they considered themselves to be sort of the insiders in that church. But then there were all those other people, the Gentiles, the people who were foreign to Judaism, often from a background of a pagan religion, of which there were many in that day and in that place. And the Jewish insiders tended to look down on those new people coming into our church, not sure that those people had the right credentials. And there certainly was friction among the groups. And in this letter, Paul addresses first these outsider Gentiles. He says, "You were aliens from the commonwealth of Israel and strangers to the covenant, having no hope and without God." In the Message version used in our litany, he states, "It was only yesterday that you were outsiders to God's ways. You didn't know the first thing about the way God works. You hadn't the faintest idea of Christ. You hadn't a clue about what God is doing in the world." And then the New Revised Standard Version, verse 13, states, "But now, in Christ Jesus, you who once were far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. By his sacrifice on the cross for all people, you have become a part of the faith and the church of Jesus Christ." The Message says, "The Messiah has made things up between us. So we're now together on this, both non-Jewish outsiders and Jewish insiders." And then going back to the New Revised Standard, "For he is our peace. In his flesh he has made both groups into one and has broken down the dividing wall that is the hostility between us." Message says he tore down the wall that we use to keep each other at a distance. You know, even using the term wall has political implications today. It's unlikely, it's likely that dividing wall to which Paul is referring here was literally a stone wall around the Jerusalem temple. It had several different areas to the temple. There was the outside courtyard where anybody could come and get close, but not really inside. That was the area for Gentiles and women. But the wall then kept out everybody except Jewish men who could go into the inner court of the temple and truly worship God inside. It's obvious that that's not the only dividing wall. There are many dividing walls which still exist in our world, in our nation, in our communities, sometimes in our churches, in our families, and even within our own hearts. There are those things that divide us from other people. We're very much aware that some of those walls exist, and a lot of us have real concern that they're growing higher and stronger as time goes on. The walls in the political divide, indeed, are getting higher, and there is really no end in sight. Moderate voices seem to be seldom heard in political debates. The most extreme candidates are the ones who always get the most attention. Now, not all walls are built on loud and verbal disagreements. Sometimes we simply build walls of stony silence. And we live within those walls in fear of those people who believe differently than us. Or at least whom we think that it would be useless to try to talk to them about our differences because it just wouldn't do any good. So we remain silent. And we rest in the certainty that our opinions are correct, hiding behind our walls. We might urgently want those walls to come down, but feel at a loss as to how to make that happen. So in this letter, Paul points to a way. He says, in Christ Jesus. For he is our peace. He has made both groups into one. He has broken down that dividing wall, that is, the hostility between us. Now, the issues might vary, but hostility and distrust and suspicion always divide people. And we are a divided people and a divided nation. We, who call ourselves followers of Jesus Christ, need to look for his direction, need to look to the Scriptures for guidance for ourselves that help us overcome, first of all, our own anger about those other people, our own hostility toward them, and help us to then become a witness to the larger society about the way of Jesus, the man of peace. Paul says, Christ is our peace. He is the one breaking down the barriers that, quote, he might create in himself a new humanity and might reconcile both groups to God through the cross, thus putting to death that hostility through the cross. It was only through the cross and Christ's death that the hostility has been put to an end. The message says, Christ brought us together through his death on the cross. The cross got us to embrace, and that was the end of the hostility. The cross gets us to embrace one another, those who are different from us. Christ came and preached peace to all people, those considered insiders and those considered outsiders. He treated everyone as an equal. Indeed, it is through him that we all share that same Spirit. We all have equal access to God the Father. So, can we remember that no matter how divided we might be around certain issues, our hope for unity only lies in Christ, through whom we are all equal, and in whom we all have equal access to God the Father. I want to show a little video clip here in just a second if we can get this to work. I think we got our people lined up. But before that, I want to say that in the Church of the Brethren right now, the denomination is working on what is called a compelling vision process as a way of trying to discern what really unites us, because we're divided on certain issues and biblical interpretation and social issues, etc. And the focus this year is on developing a vision around which we can gather. And the one thing we know for sure about that is if we are to have a central vision, the center of that has to be Jesus Christ. We have to gather around Christ. And as Jeff said as we were coming in, we were talking this morning, he said the red letter stuff, you know, Jesus' words, the Gospels. We have to put that first and make that central. So you'll hear more about compelling vision probably later this winter. Now, as I said, Election Day is coming up, like Tuesday. And Brethren Woods, the program directors at Brethren Woods, Katie and Tim Heischman, who were then program directors, they have just recently taken a church in southern Ohio. They're no longer there. But they came up with, I thought, a very unique idea. And it's going to happen again. They won't be a part of it, but it's going to happen Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock again. And that's an Election Day love feast, which seems really strange at first. But the idea on Election Day, one of the most divisive days of the year, people coming together, not talking politics, not worrying about who you voted for today, but just coming together to share together, wash feet together, eat together, share the bread and cup together, reminding ourselves that our unity is in Jesus. I've got a video clip of that if it works and sound works, so